Gentlemen, you are both drunk on cosmic wine.
Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Mark Sylvester.
And I'm Dr. Richard Schulman. This is Alt Psych.
So we got lights. We got
action.
camera. We got camera.
We got action. We are live.
Oh, we're the action. That's why. Okay.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, we're on, man. So our topic. It's a fun one for me.
Yeah, it's funny how deathbed visions and terminal lucidity would be a fun topic, but you know what? It is.
It is in this space. This is my safe place, the internet, bouncing around among other electrons, comfortable in the warm electronic soup that is the cyberwebs. So get us started with the mental wellness tip.
Wealth tip. Okay.
Hit me.
The idea is, people talk about mental health. I think of it as mental wealth. If you kind of can master how your psyche works, you're way ahead of the game. So here's the tip for today. Your brain believes everything you say, so be careful what you say. Especially people who are very negative, it's going to bring you down. My old mentor, the spy guy, his arm could be hanging by a thread. You ask him, how you doing? He'd go, excellent. So one day I said, why do you always say that? He says, my brain believes what I say. I'm programming myself for excellence. So I suggest everybody out there, watch what you say, okay? Because your brain believes it.
I like it. What do you think's more harmful, negative self-talk or negative talk from those closest to you, a spouse, a parent, or something?
Oh, negative self-talk, far worse.
Yeah.
Well, you see, when you're a kid, somebody else's negative talk becomes your negative self-talk. Now, I just X those people out. I'm not allowing that in my life.
But what's interesting, I think most people would agree with that negative self-talk is bad, but they're simultaneously the most likely to engage in negative self-talk because they don't put the qualitative emotional value on it as they do the logical, like, yeah, it's bad to say, like, well, I'm such an idiot or whatever, but much more harmful, negative self-talk. On the positive side, your body hears it all. Your thoughts are energy, and positive self-talk is very good for programming.
Well, I did a lot of sports psychology, and that was really important with athletes. Athletic performance was very much connected to a positive attitude.
Well, as Stuart Small says, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. And nobody liked him.
I don't know. I think they do.
Stuart Smalls, really?
No, they like you. I don't know about.
Oh yeah. They love me.
Yeah, that's true.
All two of our viewers. So let's kick it off. Deathbed Visions and terminal lucidity. I think we're going to be bouncing back and forth between the two because they're both like peri-dying phenomena. They can occur, I think, mutually exclusive, but they both come up usually in the final hours, days, sometimes weeks, but it's usually limited to the final week before bodily death.
Yeah.
And I say bodily death because we got some creepy stuff to talk about with terminal lucidity. It's pretty neat. So, I mean, deathbed visions, we got to define that like we always define it. Some people call it death-related sensory experiences. I've heard it referred to as veridical hallucinations, which is kind of an oxymoron. Visions of the dying, end-of-life experience. I thought about including it in the near-death, out-of-body, and shared death episode, but man, that was a packed full thing. Some people call it nearing death awareness, or even pre-death visions, but the whole deathbed visions became, I think, in like, it was coined not that long ago. And you would think it's like kind of an obscure, rare phenomenon, but I want, in case I forget to say it by the end of the show, I want anyone watching this, whoever meets or talks to a hospice nurse, to ask them about this. And I will promise you, Every single hospice nurse has experienced this. Deathbed visions are common. We don't talk about them in our culture, which I think is unfortunate because they're extremely healing, even if it's the last vestige of a dying brain and it's completely delusional and hallucinations. It's healing, it's calming, it eases transitions, it eases the dying process. It's beautiful for the family who's left behind to see this kind of experience happen. So
I actually experienced it with my mother's death. She was very wound up, very anxious, and I brought in a therapist, Anita Blackwell. If you're out there, I still thank you for what you did for my mom. She had a couple sessions. My mom was clear. And then she says to me, your grandmother and Louisa, that was her godmother, your grandmother and Louisa were here today. And I knew she was getting ready. She was getting ready to go. And I guess the welcoming committee was there for her. And it was actually a great comfort to me, to know that she was experiencing that. Now, you could say she was hallucinating if you want, but I don't go there. Because I don't really believe in death. I believe in transmutation, that we become transformed. But you know, I don't go there. So I was just really happy, and I think that when families hear this, they are really happy.
and they witness it and they see it, and we got to define it a little bit more so that people know what to look for and why it's so healing. I guess from a historical perspective, like I said, the term deathbed visions kind of came into the Western world through our token dead white guy of the day, William Barrett. He wrote a book in 1926 which was hippopotamus. Why can I never pronounce that word? Eponymous.
It's
Uh,
not one that comes up all that often.
it was called Deathbed Visions,
I like that better.
1926. He reminds me a little bit of Ian Stevenson, the late great British I want to say parapsychology researcher, but he was more than that to me. Spent his whole life traveling all over the world studying similar type of phenomenon.
Didn't you study with him for a while?
Bruce Grayson was his protege, who
Okay.
I went through all of his records, handwritten notes, and it was
Wow.
amazing seeing Ian Stevenson, and he was very serious, very professional, very scientific, very British. So, smart guy, even sounded smart if he wasn't smart. But his writings were really brilliant. They were anecdotes, much like William Barrett's works on deathbed visions, where he collected these experiences. And he never categorized them. It was more like Raymond Moody, kind of a storyteller thing. Um, but it shone light on all of the kind of components, whether that's seeing dead friends or relatives, hearing the sound of music or other deathbed phenomenon, including possibly spirit communication. So it's really kind of what put it on the map. So we're looking at 100 years ago already. Raymond Moody talked about it in the 70s. And he kind of led that was more of a evidence of an afterlife, and we'll see why, um, and kind of why there are holes in the hallucination hypothesis that I think are reasonable size holes. But the terminal lucidity portion of the deathbed vision is kind of when observers, family members, hospital personnel, if they're at a hospice house, there's usually someone with them 24/7, even at home, hospice are in some form or another. So these people are kind of watched 24/7. I mean, they're attended to in that. So these are good historians for bystanders or for observers. But as we know, eyewitness testimony, of course, is the most unreliable in terms of, court and stuff like that. But in issues like this and qualitative experience, I think it's really important because, certainly the healthcare team is more objective than the family member who may want to see this or may want to believe this. But like I said, you stop any hospice nurse, the next one that you meet, you ask them and leave negative feedback if we're wrong on this. But family members will report that their loved one's been weak, maybe in a coma, maybe they've got advanced dementia and they haven't spoken in years. It really doesn't matter. There's actually even cases of some mental disability. So somebody maybe who's been intellectually disabled is the preferred nomenclature their entire life. All of a sudden, they are suddenly alert. They're revived. Sometimes they sit up. They interact in a way that they hadn't in like a really long time or hadn't ever, which is especially interesting when you think about the hallucination or the dying brain hypothesis. Um, of course, they will a lot of times be talking to someone in the room, which is commonly historically thought was part of a delirium. But they're fixed, usually on the corner of a room. They can call out the name of a deceased loved one. They can be talking to that loved one. No one else can. Well, that's not always true. Sometimes there's been claims of other people seeing apparitions that they were talking to, which is fun too. But usually deceased people, they don't see Elvis because we all know Elvis is still alive.
It's his
But they-
birthday.
it is today. I didn't get him anything. Elvis, I got you this mug. Extreme close up. I love that. I feel awkward. Sometimes the bystander itself does have the same vision. It's like a shared death experience, but now it's a shared deathbed vision, which is super cool.
Do you
Supposedly,
think that people need to have something like this to allow themselves to let go?
I don't think they have a need. I think it can play a role in it, certainly. It can play a role in it. And it brings up a good point. When you get that close to dying, I do think you have a lot more influence on the timing of your death. Like I can concentrate as hard as I want right now about dying, and I'm probably not going to overpower my biology or even influence in it. Now, if I did negative self-talk every day, I might give myself cancer in 20 years or something. But I think in that last week of life, there's evidence. And again, stop a hospice nurse. They're the experts. They will tell you this day in and day out that, so-and-so hung on until the family arrived and then died shortly after.
Yeah, I've heard
Or,
that.
the spouse was at the bedside 24/7 because they didn't want their spouse dying alone. But what they didn't know is the spouse didn't want to die in front of them. And so the one time they get up to use the bathroom is when that person died. They'll tell you both of those because some people prefer to not die in front of their loved ones. Other people hang on until they get there. So I think that last week, you actually can will yourself to hang on and push and fight. And it changes your death date to some degree, which is really interesting thought that you brought up there. I heard, was it Johann Sebastian Bach supposedly even regained his eyesight, his vision, during a deathbed vision. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm hallucinating and seeing things. He finished his final composition with his vision returned, which was thought to be related to his deathbed vision, his eyesight. So that's pretty cool.
That is very cool.
Yeah, we wouldn't have got his last work, which
Okay, so I'll give you a different kind of question. So if openings occur, is it because a person is physiologically in a different place, or just psychologically they're in the who gives a rip, I'm going to die kind of place?
My opinion, thought, estimate is that probably 90% of it is that their physiology is hanging on by a thread, but 10 of it is the power of intention. So, that's why I can't will myself dead right now because my 90% physiology is overpowering it.
Yeah, but it just kind of occurs to me since I do a lot of mind-body work that if the physiology is compromised, maybe some of the armoring is also compromised and people can be clearer. I know but it was not right before my mother died. It was about maybe 2 weeks before. And she had all kinds of insights into her life that I was shocked that she would say the things that she said. And one of them, I remember saying, I wish you would have told me that 30 years ago. You would have saved me a lot of money in psychotherapy because I could never figure out why you did what you did.
I think that's a perfect, whatever the reverse dovetail is to our show last week when we were talking about Thomas Edison and hypnagogy and hypnopompy.
Mhm.
I think that when you're focused inward or you're not, you know, spending neurons on walking and talking and thinking and yada yada, I do think that inspiration and creativity goes up, and much like in a hypnagogic state. So when your body's failing around you, and maybe your thoughts are focused on more existential issues, not like, did I do my taxes? I think that creativity center definitely goes up. I think you get more in touch with your true nature, your true self. Um, Creativity seems to go up again. I mean, yeah, you could say, okay, well, Bach, that's what he did, was write music. Yeah, but that was what was important to him in his final days, really. So he got this huge inspiration. And like you've talked about writing music, he heard music in his head and he put it down. So I think that the creativity definitely goes up in some cases. In other cases, it may go down because you're hanging on. Some of the work I did with Bruce Grayson was specifically on death anxiety, and anxiety in general, pain, depression. Those are things that cut us off from our true self. They make it more difficult to access our higher self, creative centers, and stuff like that. So if you're really focused on, I don't want to die, and there's terror there. A lot of people have. I mean, we could do a whole show on death anxiety. Add it to the list because I did a lot of work in that region, in that area, and it was quite fascinating. Um, the categories that people fall into to what they're anxious about dying. Whether that was, if it would be painful, or is there a God or an afterlife, or am I going to hell, and yada yada. Spoiler alert, I don't want to give too much there, but the higher centers, I would think, would be much more likely to be active. And maybe that's why they do get in tune with spirit realms, astral planes, whatever the connection is, or some sort of a early life review process.
It does sort of fit in with some of the stuff we've talked about regarding out of body experiences, where, let's say, people who are undergoing surgery will find themselves floating in the surgical theater and can see all kinds of things that they shouldn't ordinarily be able to see. And I guess part of the reason that you and I are doing this, non-ordinary mind gig is just expands people's awareness of what it means to be human. These are, we're calling it non-ordinary, but it's actually part of being human.
Well, I think it's our nature, and I think that
Yeah.
consensus reality and the focus that we have, not to just blame social media and more modern video games or whatever, that I just mean human nature has evolved to be very, very frontal lobe heavy,
Oh yeah.
and
That's way before social media, my friend. That's
that is way before social media, and that cuts us off from our higher self and a centered self. So I would argue that that's the ordinary mind, that's the true
yeah,
mind, the true
yeah,
nature, and non-ordinary is what we're doing right now. This
right.
is what I call consensus reality, because I like the word consensus because it's very bland emotionally. I agree that you agree, and we all agree, because reality, especially in the last year, has been revealing of itself that it's highly subjective,
Yeah,
and
I
our
was told
realities are perceived.
reality was a crutch for people who couldn't handle psychedelics,
I like that. Can we print that on a mug, Austin?
but
Yes. Um, my beef with the delirium hallucination theory, probably one of my biggest beefs, is it doesn't make evolutionary sense. Um,
what does that mean?
deathbed almost everything that happens to us, at us physiologically, but even psychologically or neurologically, you can at least have a reasonable or provable reason why it's advantageous evolutionarily. Um, a near-death experience, a deathbed vision, not so much,
I,
because
I would counter that, but it depends how you define evolution. Let
okay,
me let me get let me
biologic evolution. How about
yeah,
that?
well, biologic for sure. But let's say spiritual, if you believe in an afterlife and you also believe that how you go into that afterlife will determine some of your experiences of it. If you go in with tremendous anxiety, it's going to create one experience. If you go in feeling comforted by the fact that your mother shows up or your grandmother or a loved one shows up and says, here, come on with me, we're going to go. Um, that sounds like a great comfort.
What evolutionary purpose does comfort have? In the moments or days before dying, you're not going to pass that trait on to your offspring. Deathbed
Well,
visions
but
don't include.
you may come back a better person.
Okay, so that's spiritually evolutionary,
That's what I was, yeah, not biologically, I don't
but
think.
and that's
But
great.
it may also affect your family. I mean, if your family is comforted by your death, the way you die, I would say that it really could have a positive impact on your family. And uh, we're looking, you and I in our work, we're looking for any little shred of positivity that we can connect with. And I certainly could see that people being comforted, but well, she's with grandma and everything's okay. I don't-
Well, one thing we always try to do on here, and I think that we're reasonably good at, and I probably wouldn't have been 20 years ago, is marrying science and spirituality more, that they're not, diametrically opposed. But you think from either the science end or the spiritual end, it's hard to always ride the middle. But so talking about evolutionary biology, talking about natural selection, survival of the fittest, Charles Darwin, there really is no purpose. There's no reason. Um, and it doesn't make sense biologically or evolutionarily. Spiritually, maybe. Spiritually, by proxy, super interesting. So if I lose my fear of death because I saw Granny pass peacefully, I'm going to live my life a little bit differently.
That's what I'm referring to, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you just blew our viewers' skulls.
Isn't that our job?
Hey, fun fact. Well, you've already read. It's a cheater. Pretend like you don't know this. Who's the most likely entity, individual, relative to show up statistically in a deathbed vision?
Well, you already said it's Elvis.
After Elvis, I thought one
I don't know. Who is it?
mother.
Okay.
Pontificate on that. I just like that. I mean, it shows the
Well, makes perfect sense, actually.
mothers are the ultimate creators and nurturers in and out of life and death, and I think that's really interesting that you could be 100 years old, it's your mother who comes to walk you to the tunnel or whatever.
Well, it makes a certain amount of emotional sense since you spend 9 months in the womb, and they don't put you down once, that there would be an imprinting, some kind of soul
See, I
imprint.
would have thought number two would have been number one, but
What's that?
who's behind mother?
Oh, you mean daddy?
Angels or religious
Oh,
icons,
angels. Angels.
or
Okay.
religious archetypes, religious figures. Although there have been cases of militant atheists seeing Jesus, they're usually culturally specific, um, which you can interpret however you want. But family member, friends, a lot of times pets, which I find really interesting. We can do
Pets
a whole
actually make more sense to me.
Well, there's a lot of deathbed coincidence involving animals. Not only, what was that Tampa where you had the cat that would jump up on the bed,
Yeah, I've heard that
and
too.
within 24 hours, the patient had died. Person they weren't
Now,
really.
every family has their legends, and I don't know, myths. The myth in my family growing up was if a pet dies, they're waiting for the next person to die. They're going to be that part of that greeting committee. And I don't know, it was we had a dog that died in August of 1965, and then my grandmother died in October. And I remember my mother had said that long before any of this happened. So it might have just been an incredible coincidence, but I did notice it. So
Well, we could talk a lot about the animals. I would say the two most common are behaviors are one, like the cat that would jump up on the bed, and two, um barking, kind of like alerting, like a service animal would do. A lot of times seeing animals apparently are staring at the same thing that the dying person is staring at, which could be cueing, could be that you just can't see that there's a ghost or an entity or a spirit or a being or something like that. But there are other coincidences that occur, like clock stopping. A lot of times if people die with a wristwatch, their watch stops at the moment of their death. Really? That really occurs. Very interesting, very odd. So there's other deathbed coincidences, whether that's their spirit leaving their body and, passing through some sort of sensitive mechanical device, or and then it interfering with it. I don't know. But that should be just generally known that there are deathbed coincidences. Obviously, we've heard about this. A mother, across the country knows that their child has died or been in an accident and died. So there's tons of coincidence like that too. I think the problem with talking about this, I've learned over the years, is one, it brings up people's own mortality, and they're not comfortable with that, which is understandable. That is evolutionarily important to be afraid of dying. That does make a difference whether or not you reproduce, up until a point. I mean, we're at a point where we live long lives, long past our useful or our ability to reproduce typically. But most people hear the story about the cat jumping on the bed and be like, oh man, I'd kick that thing off the bed and be like, get out of here, you harbinger of death. But anyone in the hospice and palliative medicine world knows that we live in a death denying culture. And the goal of hospice isn't to prevent death, it's to ease suffering. It's actually to unintentionally prolong life, because a lot of times when that aggressive, let's intervene, let's give them chemo, let's give them all these tubes, and it actually is proven to shorten life. People tend to do better on a palliative medicine hospice when their quality of care is better. And ironically, sometimes they pick up quantity as just a bonus, which is another important misconception. But it's very cathartic. It's very rewarding. All these nurses really are good at their job. They love it. They describe it as very sacred. So if a cat jumps up on a bed, it's a celebration. It's a celebration that this person's time is near, probably the 24-hour thing. So the cat isn't like shooed away or, now personally, I would kick the cat off the bed just because I think that they're Satan's creatures, but that's unrelated. It's not because of the fear of death. I'd kick him off the bed and be like, thanks. I got 24 hours to get my affairs in order. But yeah, so mothers, angels, uh, deathbed coincidences, all goes along with it. And then the terminal lucidity piece of it, going back that for a second, which some people call the rally before death, which is a very real thing. I've definitely seen all of this, by the way, with my fellowship with hospice and palliative medicine down in Fort Lickerdale. Some people call it the final push. Some people call it the end of life rally. There's a physical push, like somebody can be very weak in a coma and then they become more alert and the family thinks, oh wow, they're getting better, and then they're dead. Similar kind of paradoxical thing that you see when someone has committed to suicide. Their mood actually lightens because they see an end of their suffering. And the family was like, well, it seemed like they were getting better last week. And
I used to, when I worked inpatient, I used to warn my staff, when these people are really depressed, you better watch it when they get better. That's the danger point.
yeah,
'Cause
and
they have more energy, so they
that's
can
what
do
we're
it.
trained to separate the hundreds of people that tell us that they're having suicidal thoughts from the ones that we're really concerned about or losing sleep about or really think are going to be able to complete it.
I have a
It's
question for you. When you say terminal lucidity, is that just the rallying, or is it like certain awarenesses? What does that exactly
so
mean?
yeah, that's what I was trying to separate out. There's a physical part of it, but there's also the mental clarity. Now, if you have somebody that, um, and actually, I'm trying to remember, there may be evidence that they actually can speak in another language, if I'm remembering that correctly, or a language that they hadn't spoken for a long time.
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
usually a primary language. So maybe they were like 5 years old and they grew up in a Spanish speaking South American country, not really exposed to English, but they moved to the States. All they've ever known was English, right? Maybe they didn't even speak Spanish, but they did up until they were 5 years old. So, some people think the dying process is like life backwards, a Benjamin Button thing. Uh, except a double reverse, I guess. So those last days might be analogous to your first years of life. And so it's like they would forget that they knew Spanish and then all of a sudden be speaking Spanish. A lot of weird stuff like that does occur, but it really has to do with mental clarity, articulation. Um, um, what's the opposite of delirium? Not sentience, but
Clarity, wouldn't it
yeah,
be?
clarity. Yeah, ultimately clarity. Whereas they hadn't been clear for weeks or months, and then boom, it's just this stark clarity. So that's more what the lucidity refers to.
I
Um,
actually had that with the husband of one of my patients who had Alzheimer's, and he hadn't been clear in a long time, and he got completely clear for just a little bit,
I have some theories on that.
like a minute and a half. Told her all this stuff, and then see ya.
One of my favorite shows that I know no one who watches, and I just pray someone on the internet is like rock on, is a show called Travelers, and
Oh
yeah,
yeah, I know that show.
a lot of times that will happen right before death. That I don't want to spoil it, but they send consciousness back, and at the last couple seconds before someone's dying, um, this other consciousness comes out, which kind of is similar. It's a nice little twist on this, but really the two types, I guess, are of terminal lucidity is like a gradual one. It usually comes on like a week before, and that would be more aligned with the physical rallying. Uh, it could be an adrenal push that the body realizes that it's dying and it turns up, the adrenals to try to, get away from the proverbial saber-toothed tiger. But the other type comes rapidly, hours before death. That one's a little tougher to explain. There's usually an intention behind it, such as making plans, talking about, sometimes they've already seen a departed loved one who said, um, I guess they're telling the dying person, I'll be back on Friday. Uh, get your bags packed, get ready, get your affairs in order. We're going to the party. These are things that I heard all the time on hospice units. And if that person's demented, you're kind of like, okay, well, they're just doing what demented people do and saying things. The problem is they don't shake it. So every day they keep talking about Friday
Mm.
morning, they're coming, there's the party. And even on Friday morning, they're up early and getting all cleaned up and making sure that they're dressed and ready. And lo and behold, they die on Friday morning, not even like Friday afternoon or Saturday. It's as if they saw the future. But in this case, it would be they were told essentially when they were going to die. Now, how they keep track of days of the week in the afterlife, I don't know about that, but I want to believe. I want to believe.
Well, it just kind of occurs to me that this topic of deathbed visions and terminal lucidity is as much for the people around the dying person, really more for them, because the dying person is just, see it.
Amen.
But So that you said it earlier, so you live better, you live without nearly as much fear, and there's a certain kind of fear that, like, you touch a hot stove, you've got to move away. But there's some of the fears that we have are just stupid. We fear being successful. We fear uh, we fear being humiliated, so we don't try things. If you have that sense of clarity about your life, maybe you can live with greater meaning. I think you use the word intensity too.
Well,
Uh,
we talked about it when we talked about near death experiences, because I said that was something that happened to me very early in life, and it definitely shaped my life in a lot of ways, not just a sense of, you know, this not being the only state of perception of being, but yeah, bigger questions. Is there an afterlife? Um, but I think the biggest change, and it's hard to know because I was awful young, but just comparing myself to other people that haven't had a near death experience at any point, much less at a young age, I've never had a fear of death. Now that doesn't mean that I have a death wish. The only thing I've had that closely resembles a fear of death is since my kids were born, because not wanting to, leave them behind. But that's not a fear of death for me. Like, to me, it comes when it comes. Like the great Pink Floyd song says, why should I be afraid of dying? We all got to go sometime.
well, what I'm always confronting people with is, you're not afraid of dying, you're afraid of living. you know but I think that this topic is very cool in exploring. I go back to expanding, maybe better than exploring, what it means to be human, and how we can better connect with each other in these experiences that go across cultures and across time. That we have I haven't had a near death experience, but I had out of body experiences. I've had psychic experiences, intuitive hits, and knowing loved ones who've been through this kind of thing makes the whole idea that of being human more, there's a word I'm blocking on, everything has more meaning. Everything has more meaning. um, when you take death, and we don't like to think about death in this culture. We want to run from it. we
Yeah, the
want
death denying
We
culture.
want extra innings, we don't, even if it makes the ball game more boring, we're looking for extra innings rather than an elegant or a mindful death.
But you know what you're describing right now?
Well,
Memento mori, the ethos of memento mori, which is essentially that we're all, that goes back to the Greeks, the Latins. We talked about this, I think, on the Temple of Delphi episode, but that we all are dying from the moment we're born, and being aware of death affords you an opportunity to live a more conscious life. And so that's something I've always been drawn to and fascinated. It certainly exists much more prevalent in other cultures, but US is pretty darn death denying.
so okay, so as we're sort of starting to wrap up this topic, what occurs to me is, if my mother saw my grandmother and her godmother, whom I loved too, and I knew them both very well, that, if you want to believe that it's true and not just a hallucination, and we could debate this ad nauseum, I choose to believe it's true, by the way, hence the term belief, right? It's a great comfort to me to know that my mother was taken care of at that moment.
Yeah, it's tremendously healing for the
And a great
family.
comfort to me and I've had people, in fact, several of them who are on the other side right now, who have said before they went, I'll be there when you go, don't worry. You know,
Yeah,
and that idea that we die with confidence. I studied with a man named
dignity,
Onion
dignity.
Rinpoche, who actually wrote a book called Dying with Confidence. And it was brilliant. And I just, If you're out there, Rinpoche, hi, how you doing? But it was just brilliant. And the idea is that you choose a mindful death, and that it's a very spiritual event and does help your soul to move forward, because there are certain moments in your soul's evolution that you have the opportunity to move forward, and that he claimed that that was a great opportunity. I think just, kind of hanging out and saying hi to grandma, it was is pretty cool, that. And when we have visitations, not a deathbed, but I think that deathbed, there's such an intensity of the transition that it makes everything more meaningful. And that's why these visions and awarenesses are so important.
Well, and like you were talking about with the dementia, someone who's been demented for such a long time, you're certainly not expecting at any point, much less shortly before their death, for them to spring awake and be lucid and talk as if they were in their 30s or whatever again. But one study showed 10% of dementia patients will experience sudden improvement before death. Now that's very startling because it shakes the foundation of what is dementia and
Exactly.
what does it take for us to be human and interact and have sentience and intellect if we know the hardware's messed up, the neocortex is messed up. I think just like your body's pulling all of its energy to its core. You often get really cold hands and blue fingernails and stuff like that for days on end. Of course, the GI system's shutting down. People aren't desiring liquids or foods anymore, and blood shunted to the heart and the core and the brain. You might get a very similar thing going on with the brain, and it would shut down in a reversed, again, evolutionary way. The frontal lobe is really not important at that point. It's really not necessary. Arguably, the neocortex, which is a huge gobbler of food, 30% of our glucose is in that 3-pound goo. That's high price real estate. And if you're malnourished, and again, fasting, we've talked about having non-ordinary experiences, then you're relying more on the core, the brain, the reptilian brain, and consciousness is still there. So how in the world do these people undement in the moments and hours, sometimes within a week before doing that? You get that mental thing, but then back to the physical people or the physical phenomenon. There are people that are really struggling with delirium. They're thrashing. They're violent. Worst case scenario, they may even have to be put in restraints, and all of a sudden, poof, no more pain, no more unrest. They wake up and say, hey, why am I in these restraints? Come on. That's a phenomenon that's quite common, and there's no medical explanation for this. And it, like you said, it goes across time and cultures. That's why I am interested in all these topics, because they're shared human experiences and often involve animals as well.
Well, the
But
thing I love about you is one of many things is that you do try to explain this. I just take the tack of, well, it's a mystery.
yeah, I still have my left brain. It's not
Yeah,
dementia.
I just want to embrace the mystery and not be so afraid of it.
But the medical literature on terminal lucidity probably predates even deathbed visions, which I think is kind of interesting. Certainly, the medical literature for a couple hundred years has talked about this unexplained mental clarity and alertness as being a sign that the patient had less than a week to live. That's the medical establishment.
I've read that in mystical texts that it was 3 days. And that was
Yeah.
exactly what happened with my mother when she had the vision of my grandmother, and then she just relaxed and she was fine. And in fact, she was the clearest she had been in weeks.
Yeah.
It was really quite impressive. But I had no illusion that she was getting better. I took that as a signal she was ready to go.
And a lot of times they'll let you know as well. Dying people seem to have um, well, one of my favorite hospice studies is, and I think we've talked about this on the show. I know you and I have talked about it. When hospice researched who would be the most accurate at predicting their death. The doctors, either the specialists in life, meaning like their oncologist or whatever, versus a hospice doctor who's around this all the time and is the authority, right? Or the nurses who started hospice, Cicely Saunders, and arguably spend way more time than the doctors do, or the patients. And most people would go with doctors, nurses, and then patients. And it's the exact opposite. Patients were the best at predicting their own death.
I would have predicted patients.
And then nurses destroyed doctors.
Yeah.
Nurses were the next most accurate. Doctors could be off. Like I had my money on Terry Schiavo. I lost a lot of money on that case because I thought she was going to be gone in a week, and she went on 19 years. So,
well,
still upset about
they'll
that.
teach you to bet.
No, I think that's your first class ticket to the seventh circle of hell if you bet on dying. So
Well, I do know that my buddy who's taught me astrology said you can't predict death from an astrological chart. So there is that.
I could see that.
Wow. We certainly went all the way down the rabbit hole in Deathbed Visions and terminal lucidity.
Well, yeah,
I always thought terminal was a bad thing to have at an airport.
Yeah, I mean, it's
that
not
always
terminal.
struck me as something bad, that terminal in airport,
Well, this is educational. I know I feel smarter.
You are smarter.
Yeah, that's because I had to do the research here.
No, you're just smarter. That's just who you are. You can't help yourself.
Well, I get excited about this topic because, like I said, it's something I've done a lot of research on. I've got a lot of experience with. Fun fact, I don't want to say it was a flip of a coin, but I was as close as one could possibly be at a fork in my career of doing a hospice fellowship versus psychiatry. And it probably could have gone either way.
Wow.
Probably could have gone either way because I just found it so incredibly rewarding. Basically the antithesis of what everyone would think. Like, well, every one of your patients dies. That's got to be depressing. It's the least depressing thing, a field of medicine by far. Not only is it rewarding, it is downright sacred to be privileged. I mean, it's a privilege to practice medicine. I've always felt that way. I took the Hippocratical Oath very seriously. The knowledge, all of it. But to be there and, like you said, watch the family have closure and peace and a good death, and a death with dignity, and surrounded by your loved ones and regaling stories of their life, celebrating their life, like that's to me one of the coolest things that we can possibly share and experience. And
I had a similar experience working on an oncology unit. And
yeah,
I worked pediatric oncology, and it was
that's extremely depressing for me.
Well, it was very depressing, except for the idea that I was really helping the parents. And we didn't lose that many kids, but the actual adult oncology unit, those people were, see, the thing of it was, and I guess this is sort of a nice place to start wrapping up, the awareness of those kids, they were like 14 going on 45. They were amazing.
Oh yeah.
And some of the people that I met on the adult oncology unit had such great insights about life and were not opposed to sharing them with me. So
yeah,
cool.
we had one kid out of 1,000 patients on our caseload, and it was tough. It really destroyed me. One of the youngest patients I saw die on hospice was a 29-year-old, and I was 29 at the time. And I remember looking down at the remnant of her body and thinking about her ending her life and mine just beginning. And that was brutal. That was hard. But the child could not. That was not. I couldn't deal with that as well, with the sacred of the hospice. It's still providing the same service, but I struggled with that one a lot more. And oncology, once the focus has shifted to palliative medicine and hospice, it's completely different. Absolutely. What would have been depressing the day before on an oncology service is now not, and it's rewarding and sacred. So
that goes to show you how much your perspective means.
Yeah, there we go. Way to wrap it up with the mental wellness.
That's
Mental
right.
wealth.
Your brain believes what you say, people. So it's good seeing you and talking to you.
As always, we should do this again next week. I got a
think we
topic
will.
in mind.
Okay.
I am thinking next week it might be a good segue into synesthesia and menage a trois. Oh, I mean
Wow.
deja vu. I mix those up all the time.
Deja vu all over again.
Synesthesia and deja vu.
Yeah. Okay.
So
On
join
that
us.
note,
Join
1,
us next week.
2, 3, 4.
Well,
Be well. You blew it.
we've talked about this, Rich.
Was it 1, 2, 3?
You went on 5 that time. That was never
No,
an
I go
option.
1, 2, 3, 4. Be well. That's music, man. I
That's
guess
5.
it's about science.
All right, we'll work this out later.
Be well.
Be well.